So these are some of the key value cases where we have seen significant business benefits and have validated proof of concept during the pilot. However, we are still doing further analysis with the help of more AMI data. So the first one is identify potential high temperature meters before they reach emergency condition. So we are using meter temperature data, ambient temperature data, loading conditions, and the service point information to identify such cases. The next value case is identify location mismatch. So we are converting address XY coordinates to equivalent GPS coordinates and using them as reference points, comparing them with meter GPS coordinates. And if the difference is more than a threshold, we are planning to do field investigation to fix meter GPS coordinates. Next value case is construct an annual hourly load profile for transformer and feeders for use in asset management. So for this one, we are using transformer to meter connectivity model and feeder to meter connectivity model to determine transformer and feeder load profiles. One thing which needs to be mentioned here is the feeder to meter connectivity model which we are using is as designed, it's not as operated. And this value case is very relevant for distribution planning area to help save some of the capital expenditure due to right sizing of the transformer and also avoid some of the emergency replacements due to better insight into the load profiles. Next value case is detect abnormal gas usage spikes. So we are using usage data to identify instances where usage is significantly above the average usage. And this information, along with widespread outage information, can be very helpful to identify premises with gas-fired generators, another very useful information for gas distribution planning team. And the last one on this page is identify CADI accuracy using AMI meter restoration timestamp. So we are using AMI meter restoration timestamp to determine accurate outage duration and planning to use that information for CADI calculation to validate if it can improve CADI accuracy. So these are some of the value cases where we see significant business benefits and we are planning to explore in near future. First one is transformer to premise mismatch. So we are planning to use different information like voltage information, distance between transformer and meter, outage information, phase information, and loading information to identify meter mismatch. The next value case is predict system load and load curtailment during demand response event by leveraging 15-minute read data. So better insight into system load and load curtailment during demand response events will be very helpful to meet the firm level agreement from peak load contribution perspective. Next value case is develop weather normalized peak load contribution for individual customer based on interval data. So currently sample data is used to calculate peak load contributions at the firm level. It does not provide the flexibility to calculate the peak load contribution at individual customer level. So the AMI interval data provides this flexibility and we are planning to use that to calculate more accurate peak load contributions at individual customer level. Next value case is aggregate hourly loads by supplier and customer class for use in settlement. So we are planning to use interval data to aggregate hourly load by supplier and customer class for use in settlement. And the last value case is identify customers who have installed tankless water heaters. So we are still exploring whether we can use tankless water heater load profile and customer usage profile to identify customers who have got tankless water heaters. With this, I will see if Matt can chime in and provide some perspective on future possibilities.
So just kind of reflect back on what we just went through. So those lists of what we've done, what we're doing, and what we will do, were all driven by the business through a series of hypothesis-driven conversations and workshops that identified and prioritized analytics they felt were very valuable to the conduct of their business. And as we go through these pilots, we have our validate and test hat on. And some of these, as we kind of look through, and we all have different eyes and experience as dealing with these functional areas and these analytics, we start naturally seeing some that seem more interesting than others. But our mission here with this pilot is to test and validate these hypotheses and to really go down where specifically requirements should be driven. So, you know, some of these, when I reflect over the future possibilities, you know, whether it's, you know, tankless water heaters, so what is the penetration of that? Probably is pretty small. When we go and validate what the benefit of pursuing or not pursuing those customers as a DR or as a demand response customer, that there is a large value in that population, but it may not be big enough to move the needle overall in the program. So that's an example of maybe something that goes down the list, where when you start normalizing peak load contribution and start looking at actual contribution per event, those start becoming large validations or large value adders, especially when you start monetizing these on the secondary market. So, it's not intended to be all created equal. It is a process of going through these hypotheses and then ranking them. So, Tom, do you want to cover some of the next slide, which are some of the critical success factors?
Sure, I'd be glad to do that, Matt. I think the number one thing is get high-level executive sponsorship early. In fact, for BGE, this was driven by our Vice President of Smart Grid and Technology, who actually added this pilot to our project. And so we asked him then in exchange to help drive interest from the top down. And that was huge to get some early buy-in. That got us engaged with mid-level leadership, and then they got their people engaged. And I think Matt referred to this earlier, is really this was all driven to put the business in the driver's seat, not the technology. The technology is just a means of implementing it, but really trying to find what are the value ideas out there. Cataloging those ideas, include measures of effectiveness, priority, what other kind of data might be needed for future implementation, how complex might this be to get up and running in a quick demonstration type approach, recognizing that a full-scale implementation may take a couple of years once we're fully deployed and we have many other systems to supply data to the tool. But we wanted to not wait for all that and just really focus in on things that should show some early success and get the business energized. And I also would say not to underestimate your startup logistics. If you recall the earlier slide, we started this thing in June, but we really didn't get the tool in place and in front of users until September. And so all that time up front, in addition to identifying the value cases, we were going through corporate IT security requirements, which is pretty sensitive of the whole nature of smart grid data and who has the data and how secure is it, how private is it. We had to make sure the vendor met all of our corporate IT security requirements. And of course, you have your normal procurement process and technical installation details to work out. So all that was going on in parallel. So just don't underestimate what it might take to do that. And one other thing I want to point out that's not on this slide, in our case, we had to recognize that this was not on the radar screen of all the different business areas. This was generated from the top by our VP, but it was not on the radar screen. It's not on the work plan of the business areas who have their day-to-day jobs to do. So our little team that worked with the businesses, we had to show a lot of perseverance, a lot of flexibility, and a lot of diplomacy to adjust to the business areas because this was extra work for them. It did get their interest up. They were excited about it, but they had limited capacity. But we're hoping with their exposure to this, they can start to build their future plans to accommodate use of this tool to improve their operations in the long run.
Thank you, Tom. That was Tom Humphreys of Baltimore Gas and Electric. Just before that, Chandra from Accenture, as we talk about how BGE is using analytics with its AMI data. So a first question here from Dave, and he points out that there's lots of alerts and alarms that are generated from the analytics, but how do you deliver those to the team that has to act on them? Is there a dashboard? Is that an email? Is it a manual process?
It varies by package. So our partner in this pilot was Oracle's DataRaker. And basically they take a proprietary method of an interface directly to UIQ. So they've basically coded in an interface. And then they have some events processing language that's proprietary to them that helps make sense. So your point, I think, is going to there's a lot of white noise when you start looking at events. And how do you make sense out of what's important and what's not? And that's basically the differentiator when you start looking at some of these solutions and you start comparing them. It's the ability to wade through the noise and then get to that one or two specs of actionable data that I can then put on a probability-adjusted work list for the business to go take action on. So you're nibbling on the differentiator that really makes one solution better than the other.
Interesting. Okay. So maybe for Matt or for Chandra from Louisa, she noted that you're pulling the data from the head end and from the customer information system. Why not from the meter data management system? Was that a technical architecture decision?
It's kind of a philosophy that do you want to take VEE data, which is industry vernacular for validation, edits, and estimates. You want scrub data, in other words, but you want raw data to then to trend on. What we've found is that if an MDM gets in kind of upstream, it scrubs and gives its view of the world without seeing the true gaps and the true, I guess, deviation of that data set. So you really, to get true statistical conclusion, you really want raw data. It's a philosophical debate, but where we fell is let's give it in the raw, and then we'll use the tools to smooth it to actual results.
Terrific. That's very interesting. So Renee wants to understand, and Brian had a similar question about what's the order of magnitude in terms of the effort or the customization needed to build this with the tool. And I think, and Brian wanted to know if there's any sort of standard templates or business cases provided by either Accenture or by the vendor, or are you strictly on your own for building all of these out? So is there any quote-unquote, off-the-shelf or prepackaged or semi-custom starter kits when you get going here?
Absolutely. Of course, with Accenture, if you've known us, we like to industrialize everything. So we've put kind of methodology and starter kits around each of our offerings, kind of built out a methodology. So yes, we offer some proprietary starter kits that kind of get the ball running, whether it be a workshop approach or business cases, and let you kind of inventory what those business levers that you need to go investigate. So yes, they're out there. There's ours, there's others, integrators and management consultants that provide them as well. You can always go to the good old Google and see what's out there in freeware. But,
that's right. Terrific. So here's our contact information if you want to get in touch. And the only thing that remains to say is to say thank you to Tom Humphreys of Baltimore Gas and Electric, to Matt Comte and Chandra from Accenture, and thank you as well for joining us today.